Welcome to the Introduction to Systematic Instruction tutorial. This tutorial is designed to give you some preliminary information that you will use in your discussion of prompting systems that will happen on week 5 of class. This tutorial synthesizes the information that is found in the Alberto and Troutman book, Chapter 9. And within the tutorial, I will be referencing certain pages that you can go to for further reading. Let's first look at the presentation overview. The first thing that will be discussed is a discriminative stimulus and what that is. Next, we'll talk about prompting. The third thing will be the prompt hierarchy. Fourth is prompt systems. And finally, there will be an online quiz at the end of the tutorial that you will submit, and it will be evaluated prior to the week 5 class. This quiz will be discussed in class briefly and used as an assessment to ensure that you understand all the information that's presented here. Let's look first at what a discriminative stimulus is. This is a $1 million behavioral word that sounds kind of intimidating, but if you break it down, it's really not that difficult. Let's break it down into its smaller parts. First is a stimulus. A stimulus is an event that causes a person to act in a certain way. The second part of the definition is to discriminate. To discriminate means to make a clear distinction, to perceive the distinguishing features of something. So, if you put it together, a discriminative stimulus is an event that a person can distinguish clearly from other events that elicits a specific response from that person. Does that make you confused? It's really pretty easy. Let's look at some examples. If you see the word name followed by a colon and a line, it's typically the discriminative stimulus for a student to perform the behavior of writing his or her name on the line. Another example is when you come to a red light, it's the discriminative stimulus for you as the driver to stop at the light instead of driving straight through. A final example is an empty place in your growling stomach are discriminative stimuli for you to ask Mom to pass you another piece of cake during dessert. So given that these things are discriminative stimuli, how did they become a discriminative stimulus for us in the first place? Well, a number of things can happen. First is experience, just through instruction, observing, and listening to others. Let's go back to the example on the previous slide of the name and the line. It could be that a student who is not familiar with what that meant could have learned just from being in class and a teacher telling him or her directly, when you see this, write your name on the line. So he or she received direct instruction in this behavior. Or it could be that the student sat next to another student who really knew what to do and just watched that student and learned through that experience that when you see name and line, that you should write your name on the line. So experience plays a large role in helping certain events in the environment become discriminative stimuli for people. Another thing that influences whether an event becomes a discriminative stimulus for a person is consequences. We're going to talk more about reinforcement on week 7, but for now, in a nutshell, positive reinforcement is when we respond in a certain way to a stimulus, good things happen. And this makes us want to respond in the same way the next time the stimulus occurs. So let's think about the name example. Johnny might have learned either directly from the teacher or by watching a student who is more experienced than he that he needed to write his name on the line when he saw name line. When he did this, Johnny's teacher said, "Oh, Johnny, that's wonderful. Thanks so much. You did such a good job writing your name on the line," and received verbal praise, which Johnny found reinforcing. And in his mind, Johnny thought, well, that was kind of pleasant, so the next time I see name and line, I think I'll write my name on the line again. Negative reinforcement is simply when we respond in a certain way to a stimulus, bad things go away. And this makes us want to respond in the same way the next time the stimulus occurs. Let's keep with the same example and pretend that Johnny's teacher is very strict about putting names on papers. And when she collects the class papers, she will not allow anybody to go out to recess who doesn't have their name on their papers. So the class needs to wait, look through. Once the teacher finds the student's name on the paper, then they're dismissed to go out to recess. So the bad thing that's happening is that the students are waiting to go outside for recess and really don't want to sit in this classroom. They've learned that if they get their name on their paper and their teacher goes through the papers and sees their name, then they get to go out to recess faster. So that bad thing goes away. So that's going to want them to be sure that they write their name on their paper every time they get a paper so that they are able to go out to recess sooner than if they wouldn't have written their name on their paper. Finally, punishment. Punishment is when we respond in a certain way to a stimulus, bad things happen. This makes us not want to respond in the same way the next time the stimulus happens and try a new response instead. Pretend that Johnny doesn't write his name on his paper, and Johnny's teacher figures it out. Johnny's teacher wants to make a point and makes Johnny stay in from recess as a punishment for not writing his name on his paper. Probably that's going to make Johnny want to behave in a different way the next time he sees name and underline on the paper so that he doesn't have to stay in from recess the next time. Let's look at the next slide. As teachers, we work all the time to get students to respond correctly to different discriminative stimuli. When students do this, we call it learning. So for example, in spelling, we teach students to respond to the discriminative stimulus of the verbal direction, spell policeman, by writing P-O-L-I-C-E-M-A-N. In math, we teach students to respond to the discriminative stimulus of 9 times 7, written on the board, or spoken by the teacher by saying or writing 63. So in a nutshell, the discriminative stimulus forms the anchor for our instruction. Our goal in instruction is to get students to respond correctly when the discriminative stimulus is present and not to respond when the discriminative stimulus is not present. Ideally, we want the discriminative stimulus to be the natural cues in the environment instead of some artificial cue that we would provide as teachers. So we're always looking for what are the natural and contextual cues that would cause the student to behave in a certain way. And many times, since we've been through the class session on writing goals and objectives, many times it is the condition statement in our goals and objectives that really specify what the discriminative stimulus is. So for example, if we were writing a goal for math, we might say, when given a paper and pencil with multiplication problems on it, Susie will complete 100% of the problems with 90% accuracy. The discriminative stimulus in this goal is when given a piece of paper with multiplication tables on it. So if you look at the goals and objectives you write, you'll find that the discriminative stimulus is naturally embedded within those goals and objectives. So how do we teach students to respond correctly to the discriminative stimuli that we're presenting to them? Well, the next thing we're going to talk about is prompting. These are the tools of the trade to help students respond correctly to the different discriminative stimuli. What is a prompt? The technical definition is an additional stimulus that increases the probability that the discriminative stimulus will produce the desired response. That's a confusing definition and not one that's very helpful right now. So let's turn to the real person's definition. A prompt is simply a reminder, a hint, or a cue to assist a person in doing something. As teachers, we prompt all the time. In these next slides, I'm going to put some technical terms on these prompting behaviors that we as teachers do naturally. Prompts can come in many forms. The first type is a verbal prompt. Verbal prompts are prompts that are obviously spoken. There are two kinds of verbal prompts. The first one is direct verbal prompts. Direct verbal prompts specify exactly what you want the learner to do. They're verbal instructions. So for example, when Kelly does not respond to the discriminative stimulus of the rest of the class lining up at the classroom door, Kelly's teacher provides her with a direct verbal prompt by saying, "Kelly, come line up at the door." Here, the discriminative stimulus, which was the rest of the class lining up, didn't prompt Kelly to line up with the rest of the class. So Kelly's teacher prompted her by telling her exactly what she wanted Kelly to do. "Kelly, come and line up at the door." The second type of verbal prompt is an indirect verbal prompt. Indirect verbal prompts give the learner a clue about what you want the person to do, but they do not specify the behavior exactly. Indirect verbal prompts can come in the form of rules or hints or leading questions. So let's look at the examples below. The first example is an example of how rules might be used as an indirect verbal prompt. So Terrell is having difficulty identifying the adjectives in a sentence. Terrell's teacher says, "Remember, an adjective describes a person, place, or thing." Then she points to a word in the sentence and asks, "Does this word describe a person, place, or thing?" So Terrell's teacher gives the rule, but does not say directly what Terrell is supposed to do. She just gives the rule that will help him to correctly identify the adjectives in the sentence. An example of how a hint is used as an indirect verbal prompt is when having difficulty locating Wisconsin on a map, the teacher's assistant tells the student Wisconsin is in the north. So again, the teacher assistant doesn't tell the student directly what he or she needs to do. The teacher assistant just gives a hint. Wisconsin is in the north, which helps the student to narrow down where he or she is looking for the state of Wisconsin. The final type of indirect verbal prompt is a leading question. Let's look at an example of that. When editing her written report, Maria's teacher notices that not all of Maria's sentences end with a punctuation mark. He prompts Maria by saying, "What should you have at the end of each sentence?" And he's not telling her you need to put a punctuation mark at the end of each sentence or put a period at the end here. He's just asking her a leading question, causing her to cue into the ends of those sentences and thinking about what she needs to do there. The second type of prompt is a visual prompt. Visual prompts are prompts that can be seen by the learner. There are several types of visual prompts. The first type are model prompts. Model prompts provide the learner with an actual demonstration of the behavior that is to be performed. So for example, when providing instruction to students on how to use a balance scale, the teacher models the process of putting the objects to be weighed on one side of the scale, placing weights on the other side of the scale until both sides are equal, and then counting the amount of weight used to balance both sides. After she does this, she lets the students have a turn. So in this example, the teacher models or demonstrates exactly what she wants the students to do. The students watch her, and then they can have a turn doing the same behavior. The second type of visual prompt is a gestural prompt. Gestural prompts provide cues in the form of a physical movement, it could be a finger point, a hand motion, a head nod, an eye gaze, etc., that serves as a reminder to the learner. It's not a full modeling, it's just a physical movement that sort of cues the learner into what he or she should be doing. So for example, when assisting Anita to access her locker independently, her teacher uses a gestural cue in which he moves his hands to demonstrate the movements of turning a key in a lock, to remind Anita of the motion needed to use her locker lock and key. So the teacher here is not modeling exactly how to perform the locker routine. He's just providing a little pantomime in the form of a gesture to show Anita how to use the locker lock and to do that step in the routine. The third type of visual prompt is a pictorial prompt. Pictorial prompts provide picture cues in the form of photographs, line drawings, symbols, tables, etc., that visually depict the behavior you want the learner to perform or serve as a reminder for the learner. So for example, to assist Leah in adding the word stop to her repertoire of sight words, the teacher makes a flashcard in which the word stop is printed on top of a picture of a stop sign. That picture is giving Leah an extra cue, a visual cue, as to what the word on top of it is. Written prompts are the fourth type of visual prompt that can be used with learners. These prompts provide written statements, directions, checklists, or clues that serve as reminders to the learner. For example, to assist Gerald in editing his written work more independently, his teacher created an editing checklist to which he can refer during the editing process. This checklist consists of several written questions that Gerald must ask himself while reading through his work. And examples of those questions are: have I started each sentence with a capital letter? Have I ended each sentence with a period, question mark, or exclamation mark? Have I indented each new paragraph? So once he's written his paragraph and is in the editing process, Gerald can look at each of those written prompts and then think about whether he's done each of those things that are listed. The third type of prompt is a physical prompt. Physical prompts are prompts that provide physical guidance to the learner in order to do the task. And there are several types of physical prompts. The first one is a full physical prompt. Full physical prompts are prompts that provide hand-over-hand assistance to lead the learner through the behavior to be performed. So for example, when teaching Carl to wash his hands, Carl's teacher first stood right behind him at the sink in the bathroom, put her hands over his, and physically guided him through the movements of turning on the water, wetting his hands, getting soap, lathering his hands, rinsing his hands, and drying his hands. She essentially guided him physically through the whole activity with her hands on top of his. The second type of physical prompt is a partial physical prompt. These prompts are prompts that provide physical support to only a part of the body of the learner. It's typically at the elbow, forearm, or wrist that these physical prompts happen, and they are used to assist the learner through the behavior to be performed. So for example, to assist Lynn in writing her name, Lynn's teacher provides support at Lynn's wrist in order to help Lynn to maintain the correct hand position while writing. Notice Lynn's teacher is not providing her with full hand-over-hand assistance. She's just providing her with partial assistance at the wrist, so that Lynn is having to do part of the physical task, but she still receives some support from the teacher in order to write her name correctly. The third type of physical prompt is a touch prompt. Touch prompts are prompts that provide a brief touch or nudge to the body of the learner, and again, it's usually at some part of the arm, to assist the learner through the behavior to be performed. So for example, when teaching Cameron to place packaged sets of plasticware at each place setting in the cafeteria, her teacher provides a brief touch prompt at Cameron's elbow to guide Cameron to reach into the box of plasticware and retrieve a set. The teacher then repeats this touch prompt to assist Cameron in putting the set of plasticware on the table. So, again, that full physical assistance is not being provided, and constant assistance at Cameron's elbow, as you would see in partial physical prompts, is not being provided. It's only a brief touch to the part of the body that nudges the learner to perform the task that you want him or her to perform. We've now looked at all the different kinds of prompts that are available to us as teachers. If you would like further information, you are welcome to read in your Alberto and Troutman book, Chapter 9, pages 406 to the top of page 414. The next thing we're going to look at is the prompt hierarchy. We've talked about all the prompts that are available to us as teachers, and what the prompt hierarchy does is arrange these prompts in an order or a hierarchy, with the prompts that are less intrusive to the learner on the bottom of the hierarchy, and gradually move to the prompts that are more intrusive to the learner on the top of the hierarchy. So let's look at the prompt hierarchy model. As you can see, on the right side is a list of all the prompts that we've just discussed. And on the left side are some notations. The least intrusive prompts obviously are on the bottom of the right-hand column, and the most intrusive prompts are on the top part of the right-hand column. So these prompts move from the least intrusive to the learner to the most intrusive. It's important here to know that although you see all of the prompts that are available to you, as a teacher, not all of these prompts will be appropriate in teaching every behavior. So for example, you're not going to use physical prompts typically when teaching a child to spell a word. And you probably are not very likely to use written prompts when you're teaching dressing skills to a student. What's important, though, is to look at all of these prompts and to know that they're available to teach the multiple skills that you're going to teach across a school day, and to see how these prompts are arranged and how they relate together so that you can take chunks of these prompts, chunks of this hierarchy, and still keep the arrangement of them, because the prompting systems we're going to discuss in week 5 will rely on that. Will rely on this order a great deal. Let's look at prompting systems. We're going to just talk about this briefly because the 5th week of class is going to deal quite extensively with this. The prompt hierarchy forms the foundation of several prompting systems that are used in providing instruction. And a prompting system is simply a combination of prompts used consistently together to aid in instruction. There are 3 basic components of a prompting system. The first component is the timing of the prompts in relation to the discriminative stimulus. There are 2 types of systems, 2 types of categories of systems. There are stimulus prompting systems, which are prompts that are delivered at the same time the discriminative stimulus is presented. And then there are non-stimulus prompting systems in which prompts are delivered sometime after the discriminative stimulus is presented. So the timing of prompts in relation to the discriminative stimulus forms the first component of a prompting system. The second component is the combination of prompts used, and particularly the order in which they are used, whether they go from least to most intrusive or most to least intrusive. So we'll talk about that more during class. And the third component is how these prompts are faded. Fading simply means how are these prompts going to be removed so that the student no longer needs them and can perform the behavior independently. This is very crucial to the whole learning process, because if a student learns a behavior but still relies on these external prompts, then he or she is going to be dependent on the person giving those prompts and is not going to be as independent as he or she could be. So fading is really, really important, and we'll talk about that on week 5. Just to get you familiar with the names of the different prompting systems, the last slide is going to show you these names and how they're grouped. The first group of prompting systems are those that are stimulus prompting systems. And again, we said these are prompting systems in which the prompts are delivered at the exact same time the discriminative stimulus is presented. So the names of these are most to least prompts, graduated guidance, and progressive time delay. Non-stimulus prompting systems are those in which the prompts are delivered after the discriminative stimulus is presented, and those prompting systems are constant time delay and least to most prompts. Now, don't panic if you don't understand or are a little bit confused about this whole division and how these prompting systems work. Again, week 5 is designed solely to help you understand and use and determine when and how you're going to use these prompting systems. The purpose of this slide is to just give you some familiarity with the names of the prompting systems, and we will go over each of them one by one in class on week 5. Now that you've completed the tutorial, I invite you to take a look at the quiz and complete it. You are more than welcome to go back and review any of the slides or the whole presentation again before you take the quiz or while you are taking the quiz. So feel free to do that. Once you take the quiz, you will submit it and it will be emailed to myself or Amy, and we will take a look at it and have feedback for you at the beginning of class week 5. Thanks for your help, and we'll see you then.